The blow landed before I could even flinch. My spectacles launched across the lavish dance hall floor, cracking apart amid the stunned hush of 130 onlookers. My face stung fiercely, yet the ache deep in my heart cut much deeper. Juliet, my son's wife, had struck me right there on her wedding day, all because I wouldn't surrender the keys to my flat. "That's your reward for such greed," she yelled, her voice echoing for all to hear. "Someone your years shouldn't hog that kind of room." The quiet that ensued rang in my ears like thunder. Nobody stirred to assist as I knelt, shaking, to gather the shards of my ruined eyewear. A few attendees averted their eyes, uneasy. Others murmured quietly, but not a soul, not one, stepped up to shield the beleaguered elder in-law who'd just suffered this open disgrace. My boy Ethan remained frozen, staring at the ground as though I didn't exist. "You're no longer wanted here," Juliet pressed on, adjusting her spotless bridal attire. "Ethan and I require our own space to launch our fresh chapter. Your place would suit us ideally until we find an upgrade." Her barbs dripped with malice. For months, I'd tolerated her sneering digs at my faded outfits, my aging vehicle, my unpretentious existence. But this violation shattered a boundary that ought to have stayed sacred. I stood gradually, sensing every stare piercing me like icy blades. Salty tears traced my cheeks, but within, a shift had occurred irrevocably. That strike transcended mere flesh. It marked the breaking point. For years, I'd embraced a quiet existence, embracing modesty and reserve. I harbored truths unknown to all, including my flesh and blood. Recollections from recent times flooded my thoughts as I made my way toward the door. I recalled Juliet's initial visit to my home 2 years back. Her expression soured upon viewing my humble abode, the dated furnishings, the compact cooking area. "Is this really where Ethan's mother resides?" She'd questioned him, her tone carrying just far enough for me. From then, each call had turned into quiet agony. "Aura, consider downsizing," she'd suggested 3 months prior at a relative's meal. "In your stage of life, managing a large flat is too much. Plus, Ethan and I plan children shortly. We'll require extra room." Her insincere grin deceived only my son, who appeared to shed his spirit in her presence, reduced to a marionette. The slights had mounted steadily. It started with jabs at my wardrobe. "Aurora, haven't you got something more current?" Then came the vehicle. "That auto's ancient. It's risky for you behind the wheel." Soon after, my occasional shifts at the neighborhood florist. "I can't fathom why a lady your age keeps toiling rather than unwinding." Every remark acted as a subtle toxin eroding my confidence. I'm Aurora Hughes, 68, and throughout my days I've favored subtlety above showiness. I tend a modest bloom store 3 days weekly. I pilot a decade-old automobile. I source my garments from bargain outlets. To outsiders, particularly Juliet, I'm merely an ordinary bereaved spouse scraping by on a pension. Yet that's the facade I've meticulously upheld for years. What those pitying gazes failed to grasp was how my reality had diverged sharply before my spouse's death. My late husband, Robert, wasn't the desk-bound employee others assumed. We'd deliberately chosen frugality, concealing our genuine fortune, safeguarding our kin's seclusion in a manner that now struck me as visionary. As I departed the hall, the murmurs of the crowd trailed me like a poisonous mist. "The poor dear seems so breakable," Juliet's aunt hissed. "The groom's bride has a point. That lady can't manage solo any longer." Ethan's relative chimed in. "She belongs in assisted living, not isolated." Yet another offered mock sympathy, each syllable seared like corrosive liquid on raw sores. The chill from the venue's cooling system clashed against the boiling pressure in my core. My fingers quivered while I rummaged for my mobile in my threadbare ebony handbag, a bag I'd carried for 5 years, not from lack of means, but from treasuring utility beyond flash, a lesson lost on my son's partner. I punched in a contact etched in memory, one untouched for more than a year, since I'd foolishly believed it might stay dormant. Carlos, this is Aurora. Head to the Royal Oaks Hall at once. Yes, immediately. Fetch those papers you're familiar with. The moment's arrived to reveal reality. My tone wavered, yet it carried a resolve I'd long missed. Are you certain, Mrs. Hughes? Carlos replied, his tone polished yet worried. After this, reversal's impossible. I peered back into the space once more, spotting Juliet chuckling with her circle, no doubt recounting how she'd silenced her worthless mother-in-law, put my mother-in-law back in her spot. Ethan stood beside her, offering a feeble grin, without even a hint of regret for the scene he'd just seen. Absolutely certain, I responded. 30 minutes, Carlos. That's it. I ended the call and strode to my vehicle with purposeful strides. After years of hiding behind a facade to shield my loved ones, this marked the moment I'd finally let it go. For the first time, they'd encounter the genuine Aurora Hughes. And once that truth shattered their polished illusions, they'd grasp the real weight of regret. The lot lay still under the glow of lamps that stretched shadows across the vehicles. I settled into my aging sedan and counted down the half hour until their worlds turned upside down. 30 minutes until they realized the colossal error of belittling the woman who'd quietly supported them beyond their wildest dreams. As I idled in the driver's seat, recollections of the path to this point surged through my thoughts like a relentless torrent. It began precisely 2.5 years earlier, when Ethan showed up at my door with that anxious grin I remembered so clearly from his childhood. "Mom, I'd like you to meet someone important," he'd said. And in walked Juliet, her hair impeccably arranged, clad in high-end outfits, flashing a smile that never touched her gaze. Right from the start, I sensed trouble. The manner in which she scanned my place, judging each detail with barely concealed scorn, revealed her agenda plainly. "How charming," she'd whispered, eyeing my used furnishings and my boys' worn drapes. Her voice implied anything but warmth. Ethan, lost in what he took for romance, missed the subtle mockery entirely. That initial meal unfolded as a quiet catastrophe. Juliet scarcely sampled the meal I'd prepared with care, insisting she monitored her shape. When I inquired about her background, she dodged with vague replies, though not without probing my finances in a way that raised alarms. "So, Aurora, how do you cope on a widow's benefits? It seems tough scraping by with such limited funds," she'd remarked, her sympathy rings false. What Juliet failed to realize was that I'd been studying her just as intently as she'd eyed me. In the ensuing months, I spotted trends that sharpened my vigilance. During their drop-ins at my home, she'd drop remarks on how everything felt passé, how I merited upgrades in my later years. Yet her attention always fixed on the key assets: the building's prime spot, the sweeping balcony vista, the spacious layout. One afternoon with Ethan in the restroom, I caught her murmuring into her phone from my kitchen. "Yeah, Mom, his mother's spot is in a prime, costly neighborhood. If I convince her to downsize, we could crash here till we find our own. She's gullible enough to appreciate our help in adjusting." Her statements pierced me deeply, yet I kept my cool as she re-entered the den, acting oblivious. From then on, our exchanges turned into a deliberate act from both sides. She posed as the caring new family member, fretting over her elder's comfort, while I acted the frail senior seeking advice. Beneath it all, though, I collected details, tracked her tactics, and uncovered her real aims. It resembled a strategic board game, each believing they held the advantage. The weeks that followed saw her ploys grow bolder, step by step. It started with gentle nudges. "Aurora, I've spotted some nice spots for folks your age, complete with full amenities and zero upkeep." Soon the pushes turned overt. "Living solo at your stage isn't wise. It's risky. Imagine slipping with no one to notice for days." Every plea aimed to leave me feeling incapable and isolated. Even Ethan, my flesh and blood, started repeating those lines like an echo. "Mom, Juliet has a point. Perhaps you'd benefit from a cozier setup. Watching him morph into her marionette hurt worse than any slur. The boy I'd nurtured through devotion and hardship now viewed me as a barrier to his bliss. The mental siege ramped up once they shared their betrothal news. Their stops grew regular but charged with strain. Juliet began hauling property catalogs and flyers for retiree havens. Just checking possibilities for you, Aurora. I aim to ensure your days stay as comfortable as can be, she'd claim, laying out the pamphlets on my side table like a sales pitch. But I'd launched my own inquiries. One day, as they stepped out for matrimony tasks, I reached out to a longtime acquaintance in property dealings, Amelia. I asked you to look into a matter for me. I explained to her, a pair of people are eager about my place, and I'd like details on their true money matters. The findings sent a shiver down my spine. Juliet and Ethan were drowning in massive debts. Their upcoming wedding, priced over $50,000, was funded entirely through credit cards and personal borrowings. The rental they occupied teetered on the edge of eviction due to unpaid rent. Those high-end vehicles they piloted came with installments beyond their means. Their extravagant way of life was nothing but a front propped up by crushing obligations. Suddenly, it all clicked. The haste toward the nuptials, the pressure for me to relocate, the endless remarks on my financial fragility. This duo wasn't bound by affection. Rather, it was a frantic search for a fix to their money woes. And my residence in one of the city's priciest neighborhoods served as their salvation. The truth struck me like a blow to the heart. My child, the young man I'd nurtured with principles of integrity and diligence, had opted for the shortcut of trickery and falsehood. He'd let a driven female persuade him to view his mother as a mere asset to plunder, not a loved and honored individual. As the wedding approached in those final weeks, their efforts grew bolder. "Aura, you're being far too self-centered," Juliet remarked to me only 3 days prior to the event. "Ethan and I have given up plenty for this union. The very least you could offer is aid with a home." Her statements shed any pretense of concern. It was an outright ultimatum, masked as a kinly gesture. That evening, I resolved on a course that would alter it all. I phoned Carlos, my money manager, and the sole person I'd fully relied on since Robert, my late husband, passed away. "Carlos, please get some papers ready. I might soon have to disclose details I've hidden for years." His tone turned grave at once. "Mrs. Hughes, are you certain this is the moment?" He'd cautioned me with the insight of the advisor who'd managed my interests for over 10 years. Once those facts go out, there's no retrieving them. The fallout could shatter family bonds irreparably. Yet my decision stood firm. The relatives I'd shielded through my quiet had opted to turn against me. And now, parked in my vehicle outside the venue's lot, awaiting Carlos's arrival with the papers that would transform everything, I knew the reckoning was at hand. In 25 minutes, Juliet, Ethan, and every attendee who'd eyed me with sympathy would learn Aurora Hughes's true identity. In 25 minutes, their flawless realms, erected on deception and avarice, would collapse like fragile towers of sand. The evening wind whispered through the foliage nearby, casting playful silhouettes beneath the lamps. It felt oddly fitting that amid such a lovely dusk, countless deceptions were set to perish eternally. 20 minutes since dialing Carlos, and each tick dragged on forever. Through my windshield, the venue's warm glows shone, with lively tunes and giggles drifting from the parted panes. It seemed otherworldly that soon this festivity would morph into a horror for the key figures. I shut my lids and permitted the rawest recollections of recent months to overwhelm me. I had to recall precisely what drove me to this irreversible brink. The deepest affront occurred merely 2 weeks prior to the ceremony at what Juliet dubbed a crucial gathering of kin. She showed up at my door not just with Ethan, but flanked by her folks, a calculated trap. "Aurora, we're here to discuss your prospects." Juliet's mom, a haughty lady who regarded me like an annoying pest, started off. "We feel it's high time you chose wisely about your days ahead," added Juliet's dad, a sturdy fellow who scanned my space like an evaluator sizing up real estate. At your stage in life, staying solo in a vast dwelling isn't just pointless, it's risky. Imagine a health crisis and nobody notices for days. Their dialogue sounded scripted, too polished for improvisation. Ethan stayed mute the whole time, offering nods now and then like a dutiful marionette. Witnessing him there, beside relatives who saw me as a hurdle, felt like beholding the light of my life extinguish right before me. "Mom," he uttered at last in a timbre alien to my ears. "They're correct. Juliet and I discussed it, and we believe it'd benefit all if you shifted to somewhere suited to your years." "Suited to my years," I echoed, as fury simmered within. "And precisely who determines what's fitting for me? You." Juliet's mother shared a sly glance with her spouse, as though my retort validated some prior chat. "Aurora, It was tough to swallow, but I had to prioritize what was truly right for Ethan and Juliet. What would serve them best? I whispered, slowly grasping the full scope of the plot they'd spun right under my nose. And I guess my place would make an ideal spot for them to kick off their new life as a couple, huh? The heavy quiet that hung after my words said it all. They'd scripted this whole exchange, every point, every bit of mental coercion. That's when Juliet stepped in, unleashing her complete toolkit of emotional tactics. "Aurora, this isn't solely about the apartment. It's your happiness we're concerned with. We've looked into options, and there's this fantastic facility tailored for folks like you. Round-the-clock healthcare, group events, ready-made food. You'd connect with others who get the challenges you're facing." Her phony grin turned my stomach. "Challenges I'm facing," I replied, pretending to be puzzled. "And just what do you imagine those are, Juliet?" She glanced at Ethan for backup before responding. "You know, isolation, shaky finances, the worry of managing on your own. It's expected at your stage in life, Aurora. No need to feel embarrassed about requiring support." The nerve of this 28-year-old lecturing me on age-appropriate norms stunned me into silence for a beat. Then I caught a glimpse in her gaze that sent a chill down my spine. This unshakable belief that she owned a stake in my existence, my house, my choices. In her view, I wasn't an independent individual anymore, just a barrier to sidestep with minimal pushback. "Our calculations check out," Juliet's dad pressed on, retrieving a dossier they'd obviously assembled beforehand. "The facility runs about $2,500 monthly. Selling your apartment would fund it for years, with funds remaining to, say, assist Ethan and Juliet with startup wedding costs." There it lay, the brutal, unvarnished reality. This had zilch to do with my health or security. It boiled down to dollars. It meant turning my residence into liquid assets to bankroll their reckless spending. And should I say no? I probed, even though the response was obvious. "Aurora," Ethan chimed in, his tone polished like a script. "We're crossing our fingers it doesn't come to harsher steps. Yet if your cognitive state slips so far that sound judgments escape you." The veiled warning rang loud and clear. Without my willing participation, they'd pursue court routes to label me unfit. They'd dug deep. They'd strategized. They'd laid the foundation to seize all my assets through force if it came to that. The boy I'd nurtured with endless affection sat mere feet away, permitting outsiders to intimidate his mother. That evening, once they departed amid my staunch rejection, I wept for the first time in ages. Not from sorrow, but from the utter collapse of the dreams I'd cherished about my kin. I dialed Carlos right away. "I urgently need you to dig into something," I'd said, voice cracking with sobs. "Uncover the precise money woes of my son and his fiancée, all of it. Debts, earnings, obligations, the works." The findings from his probe were crushing. Ethan pulled in $45,000 yearly as a sales lead, yet carried over $80,000 in credit card balances. Juliet scraped by with part-time gigs as a style advisor, netting perhaps $4,000 annually, but blew cash like a top exec. As a pair, their tab topped $120,000, excluding wedding loans. Their $2,000 a month rental was 3 months overdue. The vehicles they zipped around in ate 60% of their joint pay in installments. Their primary card was capped out, and they'd begun dipping into cash loans to juggle other bills. They were spiraling into fiscal chaos, and my apartment stood as their sole lifeline. Yet Carlos's summary held one more detail that shattered me entirely. Over the last 6 months, Ethan had routinely contacted banks and insurers, inquiring about mortgages on his aging mom's assets. He'd probed protocols for securing fiscal control over the elderly. My flesh and blood had orchestrated my gradual stripping away for months. The report's closing bombshell stung deepest. Per a discreet sleuth Carlos enlisted, Juliet had confided to pals that she'd endured tying the knot with an older, plain-looking guy solely because his mom owned prime real estate with no rival claimants. For her, wedding Ethan wasn't romance. It was a calculated bet on my holdings. That bombshell proved the breaking point. For days, I'd toyed with the idea of laying bare my actual money standing to them, hoping the jolt might prompt a turnaround. But once I'd pored over that dossier, I realized it. This wasn't driven by financial need or despair. It stemmed from a raw, deliberate avarice that had twisted my son into someone I barely recognized. The weeks before the ceremony had felt like endless agony. Each call from Ethan brought fresh pleas to shift my stance. Every encounter with Juliet carried venomous remarks about my obstinacy and self-centeredness. They were starting to regard me like a doddering elder whose views held no weight. On the eve of the wedding, Ethan launched his final plea. "Mom, tomorrow marks the biggest moment in my life. Don't spoil it by digging in your heels. Juliet only wants what's right for everyone." Those statements sealed it for me. I'd forfeited my son for good. The individual about to wed wasn't the child I'd nurtured through endless devotion and hardship. Now, parked in my vehicle, awaiting Carlos, it hit me that all these events had built toward this unavoidable juncture. This wasn't vengeance or malice. It was equity. It was demonstrating the fallout from their choices. It was imparting the lesson that certain boundaries must remain inviolate. In just 15 minutes, the world would transform irrevocably. My fingers shook as I called Joseph, the retiree next door, a 70-year-old who'd quietly observed the strained interactions of recent months. "Joseph, it's Aurora. I need a huge favor from you," I uttered, my tone wavering. "Could you head to my place and grab the brown envelope from the second desk drawer? Yes, immediately. It's pressing." Joseph had become like a sibling to me after Robert's death, and I trusted he'd comply without probing. As I sat there, my mind flashed back to the talk we'd shared only a week prior. He'd spotted Juliet showing up unannounced with a property evaluator from his terrace. "Aurora, that woman arrived with some fellow carrying a satchel, sizing up your unit from the street," he'd shared, worry lacing his words. "They bolted when they noticed me. This whole situation rubs me the wrong way." Joseph was the initial one to pick up on the gradual shifts in Ethan's demeanor over those months. "Your boy doesn't even acknowledge me anymore," he'd remarked. He'd linger and talk during past visits. These days, he darts in and out like he's hiding a secret. His insights validated what my instincts had long sensed. I'd already forfeited my son well before that stinging incident that evening. The envelope I'd requested from Joseph held paperwork my relatives had never glimpsed. Financial statements, ownership deeds, portfolio summaries that Robert and I had concealed for years. Proof that the seemingly impoverished retiree on a basic income was in fact a lady wielding assets capable of reshaping destinies with one choice. 10 minutes passed before Joseph emerged in the lot, clutching the envelope. "Aurora, what's the matter? You seem deeply troubled," he inquired while passing it over. "It's tied to Ethan's nuptials." I outlined the ballroom fiasco succinctly, watching his expression tighten with each revelation. "That one's a snake," he grumbled. "I sensed it all along." "Joseph, shortly a fellow named Carlos will pull up." When he does, direct him to me here, I requested. And Joseph, come nightfall, a lot will shift. I need you to understand you've always felt like kin to me. Moisture gathered in his eyes as he inclined his head. The feeling's mutual, Aurora. Proceed as you must. With Joseph heading back inside, I flipped open the envelope and scanned files untouched for months. The top item was a financial summary displaying $400,000 in a holdings account. Next came the ownership certificate for a city center commercial property yielding $50,000 in rent each month. Then the title to a coastal residence I'd acquired as a venture a decade back. Robert had excelled in financial maneuvers, launching from a modest trading venture to a discreet fortune. We'd opted jointly for a simple lifestyle to safeguard our seclusion and loved ones' stability. Ostentatious riches invite trouble, Robert often noted. Hidden affluence grants leverage. I'd never foreseen deploying that leverage versus my own child. Every item in the envelope embodied decades of diligence and astute choices. My part-time role at the florist 3 days weekly wasn't for cash. It kept me engaged and rooted in neighborhood life. The aged automobile I operated stemmed not from scarcity, but from grasping that flashy displays bred complications. My residence, the very one Juliet eyed so greedily, ranked as the lowest asset in my holdings. I'd selected it for the sentiments it evoked, not its worth. It was our shared haven in Robert's final phase, where we'd mapped our dreams, where he'd slipped away in my embrace following a valiant struggle while with cancer. Yet another item in that file was about to upend the world of Ethan and Juliet entirely. Over the past 3 years, ever since my boy began facing money troubles, I'd been quietly covering a bunch of his bills behind his back. Those credit card bills he figured were settled by job perks were really deducted from my own funds. The reduced rent he believed he'd bargained for with his landlord, that was cash I sent over each month. All without Ethan's awareness, I'd been funding his reckless habits for ages. The upscale flat he called home, the vehicle he cruised around in, and even parts of the ceremony unfolding right now, all owed to my hidden monetary aid. I'd convinced myself I was supporting my child during tough times, oblivious to how I was bankrolling his shift into someone utterly foreign to me. The statements revealed regular outflows amounting to $4,500 that had propped up the crumbling vessel of Ethan's finances. Funds he assumed stemmed from salary extras or rebate checks, but truly from his mom scrambling to shield him from the fallout of his poor choices. The twist was crushing. As Juliet shamed me for dragging down their upcoming union financially, I was essentially the sole factor enabling that union. While they plotted to seize my home to fix their cash woes, I'd been resolving those issues covertly for years. I shut the file and glanced back at the venue. The illumination persisted. The tunes kept flowing. The attendees continued reveling. But in under 5 minutes, Carlos would pull up with the crucial paperwork I required. In under 5 minutes, the unraveling of every monetary lifeline I'd extended to safeguard a son who'd opted to turn against me would commence. This isn't payback, I told myself. This is fairness. This is instructing them that deeds carry repercussions, that avarice demands payment, that kinship can't be traded for fiscal gain. I'd shielded Ethan from truth far too long, and that shielding had twisted him beyond recognition. Car beams swept into the lot, casting a stark glow that briefly dazzled me in the darkness. There was Carlos, right on schedule, bearing the papers set to transform it all irrevocably. I stepped from my vehicle and headed his way, sensing with every stride how I distanced myself from the old Aurora and drew nearer to the version I must embody now. "Mrs. Hughes," Carlos greeted as he emerged from his ride, clutching a sheaf of legal docs under his arm. "Are you absolutely certain? Once we enter, there's no reversing what's coming." I peered one final time at the hall, where my son and his fresh bride were likely toasting their triumph over the worthless elder they'd just demeaned. I've never felt more convinced of anything, Carlos. The moment has come for them to encounter the true Aurora Hughes. Beneath the lot's glow, Carlos flipped open his binder and started laying out the forms he'd assembled with his usual precision. "Mrs. Hughes, this is the directive to halt all transfers you've initiated on behalf of Ethan Hughes," he explained, indicating the top sheet. "Plus, here's the eviction notice for the rental pact you'd secretly backed. The owner gets it first thing tomorrow." I grasped the sheets with shaky yet resolute fingers. Every page symbolized a strand I'd meticulously spun over years to guard my child, and here I was, severing them sequentially. "What about the venue fee?" I inquired, though the response was clear: revoked. Carlos affirmed, "The security deposit you'd covered gets pulled this evening. They'll have till dawn to line up another payment source." The weight of my impending actions crashed over me like an icy surge. For 3 years, I'd served as the unseen buffer sustaining Ethan and Juliet's existence. Their residence, his wheels, and the nuptials happening even now, all fueled by my concealed contributions. And tonight, in one fell swoop, I was yanking away every bit of that backing for good. "Carlos, I need you to grasp this," I told him while inking my signature on each form with a resolve I'd lacked in ages. "This isn't malice or retaliation. It's the sole path for them to grasp the true worth of matters. I'd insulated them from their choices' outcomes too extensively, fostering their decay into strangers." "I get it fully, Mrs. Hughes," Carlos responded, his tone laced with sincere admiration. "Over my 30 years advising on finances, I've witnessed countless clans torn apart by selfishness and disregard. Your choice demands bravery beyond what most muster." His remark lent me the F. The resolve that had eluded me until that moment finally surfaced, urging me forward for one final push. Arm in arm, we made our way to the entrance of the grand hall, and with every stride, my pulse quickened noticeably. This wasn't mere anxiety surging through me. Instead, it was an odd blend of sorrow over the pieces of myself I'd surrendered, coupled with eager hope for reclaiming my honor, my worth, and my fundamental entitlement to respect as a person, rather than mere property to be used and discarded. The lively tunes halted sharply as we crossed the threshold into the ballroom. 130 gazes swiveled in our direction, etched with bewilderment across the attendees' expressions. A few spotted Carlos right away. Over the years, he'd managed the monetary interests of numerous influential households in town. Spotting him at gatherings like this often signaled that a significant development was unfolding. Juliet was the initial one to snap out of it. "What on earth are you doing back here, Aurora?" She bellowed from the middle of the dance area, where she'd been snapping pictures alongside Ethan. "You already stormed off earlier. Isn't that sufficient commotion for a single evening?" Her tone dripped with the haughtiness I'd grown all too familiar with, yet now it carried an undercurrent of unease that felt entirely new. "Esteemed guests," Carlos announced in a steady, authoritative tone, "please forgive the intrusion on your festivities, but I must address pressing legal issues with Mr. Ethan Hughes and Mrs. Juliet Dawson." The ensuing quiet was profound enough to catch the faint whir of the ventilation system. A handful of people started reaching for their phones, intuiting that they were on the verge of observing a remarkable scene. Ethan edged closer gradually, his complexion ashen and his stare clouded with uncertainty. "Mother, what's the meaning of this?" he directed at me, his words lacking the assured edge they'd held mere moments ago when he'd demeaned me so thoroughly. Who exactly is this fellow, and why mention legal concerns? I noticed his fingers quivering faintly as he fiddled with his necktie, a telltale sign of nerves he'd displayed since he was young. "Ethan," I replied, with a steadiness that had been absent from my speech for what felt like ages. "Meet Carlos Jones, my advisor on finances and law. He's here to present some paperwork that I suspect will prove quite revealing for you." Carlos flipped open his briefcase and extracted the initial paper. "Mr. Ethan Hughes, Be informed that the monetary backing your mother extended for your rental contract is now revoked without delay. Your property owner will receive notice come morning, leaving you 30 days to secure alternative support or relinquish the premises." Ethan's features lost all warmth, turning ghostly. "Monetary backing," he whispered, fixing me with a look dawning realization and dread. "Mother, what does he mean?" Yet his countenance betrayed that some inner awareness had already clicked into place. For a long stretch, he'd harbored doubts about the ease of his fiscal fortunes, but he'd avoided probing deeper, fearing the truths might unsettle him. Furthermore, Carlos pressed on without pause. "The regular $4,500 deposits from your mother into your private accounts are now halted indefinitely. This covers charges for credit lines, vehicle coverage, and assorted bills you assumed came from elsewhere." Juliet emitted a sharp intake of breath that reverberated across the hall. "That's absurd," she cried out, dashing over to us with her gown trailing behind. "Ethan's mother isn't wealthy. Just observe her lifestyle, her wardrobe, her vehicle. She's an elderly lady scraping by on a pitiful retirement stipend." Her frenzy was unmistakable, and whispers rippled through the crowd, growing more intrigued by the second. "Lastly," Carlos declared, drawing the final sheet from his case, "the funding assurance for tonight's event is likewise withdrawn. Venue operators may require complete settlement prior to allowing anyone to depart this evening." His statement landed like an explosive charge in the room, prompting a few attendees to fidget anxiously toward the doors. The truth struck Ethan with crushing force. "You," he breathed, staring at me as if struggling to absorb the revelations. "All along, you've been the one, covering every cost." His tone cracked at the end, and briefly, I glimpsed the frightened child he'd been, lost and bewildered. "That's right. For 3 years now, Ethan," I affirmed, my delivery remarkably composed amid the turmoil I'd endured. 3 years where I convinced myself I was aiding you through tough patches. 3 years convinced you'd pull yourself together and embody the principles I instilled in you. 3 years clinging to the belief you'd recall the ethics I passed on. Juliet started circling frantically, hands gripping her temples in mounting panic. "This isn't possible. None of it can be true," she wailed while onlookers observed with a blend of shock and uneasy curiosity. "You're just a destitute senior employed at a floral boutique, piloting a decade-old ride. How could you possibly afford any of this?" "Deceptions run deeper than the surface, Juliet," I responded at last, a weight lifting as if years of burden were easing away. The era of discreet restraint was over. For decades, my husband and I had opted for a modest lifestyle, convinced that flaunting riches invited trouble. Our instincts proved spot on, though the trouble arose from an unforeseen quarter. The melody had faded entirely, leaving the grand hall filled only with the frantic breaths of the bride and groom, alongside the rising whispers from the attendees who were starting to grasp that they were in the midst of an astonishing spectacle. A few had already whipped out their smartphones to capture the moment, sensing it would soon morph into local folklore. "Mother," Ethan uttered, his tone fractured. "There must be some solution to salvage this. The ceremony, the crowd, all of it." Yet in his gaze, I detected the dawning realization of the profound loss he faced, far beyond mere funds or backing. He had forfeited his mother, the one who had cherished him without reservation for 35 years. The sole remedy, I responded to Ethan, lay in never shattering it to begin with. A profound hush enveloped the hall. The 130 visitors froze, absorbing the weight of my declaration. Juliet remained rooted in place for the first time that evening, her eyes flitting from Carlos to the papers and then to me, desperately seeking a flaw in the crumbling world around her. Ethan fixed his stare on me with a look etched forever in my memory, a blend of disbelief, delayed insight, and utter dread. "Mrs. Hughes," Carlos announced in a tone carrying to every corner. "Shall I go ahead and disclose the complete monetary breakdown?" His query lingered like a blade poised above the couple's necks. I noticed a number of guests edging nearer, captivated by the escalating saga. "By all means, Carlos," I answered with an unexpected poise. "I believe the whole assembly merits the unvarnished facts." Juliet attempted a frantic cry to halt him, but Carlos lifted a palm and pressed on with the accuracy of a clinician in mid-procedure. "In the past 36 months," Carlos resumed, scanning his notes, "Mrs. Aurora Hughes has disbursed a cumulative $162,000 to support the daily needs of her son, Ethan Hughes, and his betrothed. This encompasses $48,000 for housing costs, $44,000 for credit balances, $18,000 for auto coverage, and $22,000 for sundry outlays." A wave of stunned murmurs rippled across the room. Certain attendees traded shocked expressions. Others tapped at their devices, crunching the numbers for confirmation. Juliet's mother, who had stayed put at the main table amid the clash, rose gradually, her complexion drained of color. Moreover, Carlos forged ahead without pause. "Mrs. Hughes has underwritten the entirety of this event's charges, encompassing the venue, catering, entertainment, decor, and images, totaling $53,000. Funds that, as I noted before, are now unavailable to fulfill these obligations." Juliet at last regained her speech, though it emerged more as a wail than articulate protest. "This can't be real. It's fabricated. How could anyone possess such wealth and exist like a vagrant?" She pivoted toward the crowd, seeking allies, but encountered only intrigued stares, with a few openly relishing her plight. "Dear Juliet," I interjected with a composure that sharply opposed her frenzy, "you've just absorbed a crucial truth about presuming based on exteriors. For years, my husband, Robert, and I prized seclusion over display. That choice proved profoundly prudent." Ethan at last stirred, advancing toward me with tentative strides. "Mom, surely there's a rationale. There must be a path to mend this. You can't shatter my existence this way." His words cracked at the end, and briefly a surge of parental ache threatened to unsteady me. "Shatter your existence," I echoed as fresh ire simmered within. "Am I the one ruining your life? Wasn't it your spouse who struck me before 130 onlookers? Wasn't it you who watched in silence as I endured public shame? Wasn't it you who schemed to force me from my residence?" My statements echoed through the hall like solemn chimes. A handful of guests inclined their heads, vividly recalling the incident that ignited this turmoil. Some even clutched recordings on their phones of Juliet's blow, electronic proof of the callousness that unleashed this exposure. "But that was unrelated," Ethan mumbled. His words ring hollow even to him. "We were unaware. We misunderstood. We assumed you truly required aid." His justifications rang feeble, and I spotted attendees swapping glances of disdain. "Unaware," I challenged, my pitch elevating for the initial time that evening. "Unaware that you were orchestrating a kin siege to coerce the sale of my property. Unaware that you'd enlisted a property evaluator behind my back. Unaware that you've been exploring lawful methods to have me declared unfit if I refuse to play along." As each query landed, Ethan's stance wilted further. Seizing the opportunity, Carlos retrieved yet another paper from his briefcase. "Mr. Hughes, I need to notify you that your mother has chosen to revise her testament. Every asset once earmarked for your inheritance has now been channeled toward organizations aimed at shielding elderly individuals from mistreatment by relatives." The weight of this announcement hit like a muffled blast. Juliet reeled back as though struck by an invisible force. "You can't possibly do that," she screamed, her facade of poise shattering entirely. "We're your kin. Ethan is your sole son. You can't cut him out because of some petty quarrel." "A petty quarrel," I echoed, allowing the phrase to linger in the charged atmosphere. "Is that your term for a familial plot to rob an elderly woman of her residence? Is that your rationale for striking your spouse's mother on her very wedding day?" My tone had chilled to a frost, and I noticed several attendees recoil. Juliet's father, who had stayed mute during the entire clash, stepped forward at last, his face betraying thinly veiled alarm. "Mrs. Hughes, it seems the day's passions have everyone on edge. Perhaps we could address this privately once tempers have cooled." He sounded like someone who'd just backed the losing contender. "There's no private matter to settle," I countered resolutely. I voiced all I needed right here before the very crowd that saw my degradation. You opted for a public spectacle, so my reply stays public. The onlookers' gazes shifted back and forth among us, captivated by the volley of words like spectators at a rally. Carlos shut his briefcase with a sharp click that reverberated across the grand hall. "Mrs. Hughes, every paperwork has been presented and clarified. The consequences take effect right away." He faced Ethan and Juliet with a composed demeanor, though a hint of triumph flickered through. "I recommend you consult your personal attorneys and fiscal experts without delay." Juliet buckled at last. She sank into a close-by seat and dissolved into ragged wails that filled the venue. "It's all fallen apart," she whispered amid her sobs. "All our schemes, all our efforts, utterly demolished." Her bridal gown, formerly pristine, now bore creases and damp patches from her weeping. "No," I responded, drawing nearer to her for the initial time since the blow. "What's demolished are the deceptions, the avarice, and the utter disregard. What's demolished is the delusion that you can handle others as mere possessions and dodge repercussions." I halted before her, compelling her gaze upward. "This is the outcome when you confuse compassion with frailty." Ethan moved to his bride and rested a quivering palm on her arm. "Juliet, we must discover a solution to mend this. There has to be an option." Yet even in his words, his eyes revealed the awareness that the moment had passed. Certain bonds, once torched, defy restoration. "There is a path to mend it, Ethan," I stated, meeting his stare squarely for the first time in ages without a sting of hurt. "You could draw lessons from it. You could evolve through it. You could emerge as the individuals I once envisioned prior to avarice's taint." My delivery eased a touch, for amid it all, he remained my child. But that evolution must occur sans my monetary support, sans my residence, and sans my legacy. You'll navigate it the tough route, as most folks do. The hall hung in utter quiet, each soul there grasping that they beheld the irreversible fracture of a bloodline. Carlos and I proceeded to the doorway, abandoning a space brimming with stunned visitors and a fresh pair of spouses whose idyllic realm had crumbled in under half an hour. As Carlos and I neared the exit, the hush was pierced by an unforeseen call. "Hold on, Aurora!" It came from Lucy, Ethan's sibling, who had lingered at a distant table amid the turmoil. She dashed our way, eyes brimming and features twisted in sheer dismay. "Aunt Aurora," Lucy uttered shakily, "I was completely in the dark about any of this. I promise. Ethan kept their intentions toward you hidden from me." Lucy had long been my cherished niece, a 29-year-old educator who'd nurtured our bond even as Ethan pulled away. Had I any inkling of their scheme against you, I'd have intervened to halt it. I paused and regarded her, spotting the sincerity I'd recognized since her childhood days in those eyes. "I believe you, Lucy," I murmured tenderly, cupping her face. "You've always stood apart. You've never viewed others as chances or assets to plunder." Her weeping intensified as she affirmed with a nod, plainly shattered by her siblings' deeds. "But why keep the funds a secret from us?" Lucy inquired, her tone laced with sincere bewilderment. I was baffled. How could you hide all of this for years? That query called for a straightforward response, particularly from a person who'd always shown me kindness and true affection. "Your Uncle Robert and I figured out ages ago how wealth alters folks," I clarified, as a few attendees subtly edged nearer to overhear. We've witnessed homes torn apart by windfalls, bonds shattered by debts, and kids viewing their folks as mere ATMs. We opted for a modest life to safeguard the ties that truly count. Lucy gave a gradual nod, starting to grasp the insight in my choices. Yet Ethan wasn't like that growing up. Back in our youth, he'd stand up for anybody who wronged you. What's become of him? Her words held the anguish of a sibling who'd observed her brother morph into a stranger. What befell him was Juliet, I answered with sorrow, yet no resentment. What struck him was avarice posing as romance, drive lacking principles, and my own attempts to shield him, which robbed him of vital teachings on accountability and repercussions. My words echoed across the venue, where the crowd hung on every syllable. Carlos had politely lingered at a distance through our talk, but then he drew close and whispered to me, "Mrs. Hughes, the venue overseer, is heading over. It looks like word of the payment revocation has reached him already." Sure enough, a sturdy fellow in formal attire was striding our way, clutching a stack of documents and sporting a grave look. "Mrs. Hughes," the overseer stated in a strained tone, "I've gotten word of a payment reversal that's entirely out of order. The agreement for this gathering is secured through tomorrow dawn. Could you clarify this situation?" His arrival injected a fresh dose of pressing urgency into the mess I'd unleashed. "Mr. Martinez," I responded, recalling his name from our hushed discussions when I covertly funded the ceremony. "The monetary backing I offered for this affair has been pulled back owing to unforeseen issues revealed this evening." I nodded toward Ethan and Juliet, frozen amid the hall like figures of defeat. "I see," Martinez acknowledged, surveying the chaos with the savvy of a veteran in event coordination. "And who's stepping up for the bill now?" The remaining balance comes to $53,000, covering the hall, catering, entertainment, decor, and photo ops. His tone stayed businesslike yet resolute, underscoring that resolution was needed right away. Ethan at last stirred, edging toward us unsteadily. "Mr. Martinez, this has to be a mix-up. My mother, she can't just pull the funding out from under us. We're kin. We can sort it out." His plea echoed a frantic edge I'd never encountered from him. The frantic edge of a guy suddenly facing the full weight of his choices. "Sir," Martinez countered with the restrained tolerance of an expert, "that fiscal assurance came from Mrs. Hughes on a personal level. She holds the authority to retract it whenever she sees fit. I require an alternate payment method pronto, or I'll have to halt everything." Juliet staggered forward too, her gown now a total wreck and her face streaked with mascara from crying. "You have no right to this," she screamed at him. "It's our special day. You can't wreck it all because of cash woes." Her breakdown was palpable, and whispers rippled through the assembly with rising unease. "Madam," Martinez shot back, his resolve hardening, "I'm not the one causing trouble. I'm merely enforcing the deal you agreed to. Without prompt alternative funds, I'll need to clear out everyone and cut off all provisions." His decree landed heavily in the space, like an irrevocable verdict. The harsh truth started sinking in for those present. A few were already snatching purses and slipping toward the doors quietly. The rest stayed riveted by the unfolding spectacle, akin to onlookers unable to avert their gaze from a roadside mishap. "Mother," Ethan uttered, coming nearer with moisture welling in his eyes, something absent since his boyhood days. "I'm begging you, I realize our actions were misguided. We wounded you, I get that, but look, 130 folks are here. We've got snapshots, we've built moments. You can't shatter it all because of our dispute." His voice cracked at the end, and briefly, I glimpsed the young child he'd been. "Ethan," I countered with an unexpected steadiness, "I'm not the one breaking things. You did that by picking self-interest over family, by favoring deceit over truth, by opting to shame me openly rather than honoring me as your parent." Every phrase cut sharp. "But those were the words that had to be spoken. But what's our next move?" Juliet inquired in a frantic tone, gazing at the attendees who kept streaming out of the grand hall. How do we even begin to justify this? How will we cover all these expenses? Her distress was palpable, and it was clear she was at last grasping the true fallout from her choices. You'll handle it like any accountable person would, I responded. You'll seek out legitimate ways to generate income. You'll master the art of budgeting within your limits. You'll come to appreciate the value of striving for your desires through effort, rather than relying on others to hand them over. My tone had intensified, channeling years of hard-earned insight into every syllable. Carlos sidled up quietly and whispered, "Mrs. Hughes, the paperwork is all finalized. Every document has been served." Before elaborating, "We've exhausted our options at this point." His intent was unmistakable. The moment had arrived to depart, allowing Ethan and Juliet to confront the repercussions of their actions without me lingering as an interference. Lucy drew near once again and enveloped me in a firm embrace. "Aunt Aurora, I want you to understand that my admiration and affection for you remain unwavering, regardless of Ethan's outcome." Her statement hit my battered spirit like a lifeline, affirming that not every relative had succumbed to avarice. "And you'll forever have mine, Lucy," I answered, hugging her back. "Let this evening serve as a reminder in your future choices. Recall that true integrity shines not in possessions, but in our care for those we cherish." Her sobs dampened my blouse as she agreed, fully absorbing the profound teaching playing out right there. Martinez returned, now with heightened insistence. "Folks, I require a swift decision. I have prior obligations this evening and can't retain the team here endlessly without payment assurances." His courteous restraint was wearing thin, piling even more strain onto the already dire circumstances. "You have my contact info," I told Ethan and Juliet one final time. "Once you're prepared for an authentic discussion on dignity, principles, and accountability, once you've grasped the essence of self-reliance, once you can meet my gaze with a sincere remorse for tonight's betrayal, then we might converse. But first," I continued, locking eyes with them, "you'll need to devise a solution to the disaster you've wrought here independently." With that declaration, I pivoted and headed for the doorway alongside Carlos, abandoning a venue brimming with turmoil, anguish, and the unforgiving truth of earned reprisals. 3 days post-wedding, my home had transformed into a sanctuary of tranquility I hadn't known in ages. Joseph had stopped by each dawn bearing coffee and fresh-baked goods from the neighborhood shop, ensuring my well-being in the wake of what he termed the evening Aurora restored her self-respect. His regular check-ins had been a salve for my weary heart, underscoring that I still possessed a circle of loved ones who prized my essence. The landline had buzzed nonstop over those 72 hours. Ethan had dialed 37 times, his voicemail shifting from raw fury to abject supplication. Juliet had fired off 14 SMSs, growing ever more unhinged with each one. Her folks had knocked on my entryway on 2 occasions, insisting I rectify the havoc I'd unleashed, yet I'd stood resolute with a serenity that astonished me. Carlos showed up that forenoon bearing updates that, though anticipated, hit with crushing weight in their entirety. "Mrs. Hughes," he shared as we sipped tea overlooking the terrace, "I've gathered intelligence from every angle. Ethan and Juliet faced eviction from their residence yesterday at dawn. The venue has launched court actions to reclaim the $53,000 due. Their cards have been frozen due to unpaid balances. And their current lodging," I'd probed, even as intuition supplied the reply. "Under Juliet's parents' roof," Carlos confirmed. "Evidently, it's a compact 2-room space already occupied by 3. Tensions are high, per my contacts." His demeanor implied that high understated the chaos considerably. That evening, as I tended to my greenery on the veranda, a recognizable vehicle pulled up curbside. It was Lucy, accompanied this time by Amelia, my longtime associate in property dealings. and unexpectedly, Joseph emerged from the rear. "Aurora," Lucy called up from the pavement. "We must speak with you. There's critical information you deserve." Upon reaching my place, their expressions blended pressing need with worry, instantly heightening my guard. "Aurora," Lucy started, "since that wedding fiasco, I've dug into certain matters. Details I believe you should hear before matters escalate irreversibly." She settled onto my sofa, clutching a dossier that appeared every bit as formal as the packet Carlos had transported to the event. "Escalate to what end?" I queried, serving her a cup of tea while striving to keep my composure. I watched as Amelia cleared her throat and finally broke the silence. "For the past 3 days, Aurora, I've been investigating Ethan and Juliet's finances in depth. The revelations I've uncovered far exceed our wildest suspicions. They'd been scheming this for over a year," she went on, flipping open the folder to expose papers that twisted my gut in knots. I uncovered proof that Juliet had sought advice from attorneys focused on mental capacity issues for the elderly. Their scheme included a thorough strategy to have you officially deemed unfit and seize authority over your entire estate. Joseph, quiet up to that point, shifted ahead with a somber look. "Aurora, it gets worse. After you departed the ballroom that evening, I caught Juliet on a call with somebody. She was ranting that the elderly lady had wrecked their scheme, but they could fall back on option B. His revelation chilled me to the core. "Option B," I echoed, my insides twisting from a blend of dread and rage. Lucy clasped my hand softly, offering reassurance. "Aunt Aurora, they've been whispering to folks that you've turned senile, pointing to the wedding fiasco as proof you've drifted from sanity. They're compiling arguments for a judge to rule you incapable of managing your matters. The depth of their treachery unfolded like a festering sore. It wasn't sufficient to shame me openly, to plot taking my residence, to plot against me for months. Now they aim to twist my rightful reaction to their malice into signs of instability. This level of malice went beyond my darkest thoughts. Yet there's additional ugliness," Amelia said, her tone quivering. "I've learned Juliet's been circulating tales in the community about your unstable conduct. She's approached multiple neighbors, urging them to flag any odd behaviors they notice regarding you." The organized assault of her slander hit me like a punch. Just then, Carlos arrived for our planned discussion and stepped into the heavy air of the room. "Mrs. Hughes, it looks like you've learned of the latest tactics already." His face bore an unprecedented severity. "I bring further details that back up what your allies have unearthed. Yesterday, Ethan submitted an initial request," Carlos explained, retrieving files from his briefcase. "He's seeking a judicial review of your mental fitness, citing what he labels as impulsive actions and unstable monetary choices. He's attached affidavits from various attendees at the wedding." "Affidavits?" I queried as fury started overtaking the disbelief. "Of what sort?" Carlos scanned his notes before replying. "Accounts depicting your unwarranted rage toward a blameless newlywed pair. Descriptions framing your money moves as spiteful and harmful. Assertions implying you've forfeited the capacity for sound judgment." Lucy gripped my hand more firmly. "Aunt Aurora, they've swayed a number of guests into endorsing these accounts. Many didn't grasp the full context that night. They only witnessed an older lady confronting the couple. Her words carried the weight of helplessness despite knowing the facts. However, we have positive developments as well," Joseph cut in, flashing a grin that clashed with the dire mood. "More supporters stand with you than they realize." He pulled out his phone and displayed a display that floored me. "Joseph, what's this?" I inquired, staring at what seemed like a social media clip racking up thousands of views. "Aurora, recall how guests filmed the event. A few of those clips have exploded online. Viewers aren't picturing a deranged senior assaulting an undeserving duo. Instead, they see a poised figure exposing decades of mistreatment and deceit." Amelia peered over at the screen. "Aurora, the feedback on these posts is largely supportive of you. Folks are lauding your bravery, your poise amid adversity, your choice to draw lines. Others are recounting their personal tales of kin-based mistreatment. You've emerged as an icon against the mistreatment of the aged. Carlos gave an affirming nod. This wave of public backing could prove crucial in litigation. It's tough to claim mental unfitness when crowds are cheering the reason and fairness in one's conduct. His practiced assurance resurfaced, hinting the court fight might not tilt so heavily against us as I'd worried. "But one more thing demands your attention," I declared, committing to a choice I'd mulled over the previous 3 days. If Ethan and Juliet insist on escalating this into an open courtroom clash, then they're about to uncover they have no idea who they're truly up against. I rose from my seat and headed over to my desk, where I'd assembled my own stack of paperwork. Over the past 3 days, I'd reached out to multiple attorneys focused on elder mistreatment cases. I'd meticulously recorded every detail: the menacing drop-ins, the veiled warnings, the plot to deprive me of my assets, and even the smack from Juliet. I pulled out snapshots of my bruised face, captured right after the ceremony, solid proof of the bodily harm. If they crave conflict, I pressed on with a resolve I hadn't known in years. Then conflict they'll get. But it'll unfold by my rules, using my means, backed by unassailable honesty. What's more, I noted with a grin that caught me off guard, I've resolved to take a step I overlooked for far too long. I'm ready to share my complete narrative with the public. I'm set to expose precisely how avarice masquerades as familial affection. A fresh vibe surged through the space. The vibe of folks certain that righteousness favored them and equipped to enforce it. 6 months on from that pivotal evening that split my existence into distinct eras, there I was in the city's premier TV studio, poised for the on-air discussion that would lay out my entire saga for the nation. The show, Stories of a Lifetime, had gotten in touch with Carlos once the wedding footage racked up over 2 million views across online platforms. My ordeal had evolved into a widespread emblem of defiance against mistreatment of the elderly by kin. The reporter, Catherine Diaz, esteemed for her ethical reporting, scanned her script as the crew tweaked the lights one last time. "Mrs. Hughes," she remarked with genuine warmth, "your bravery has motivated countless individuals. In the last 6 months, we've fielded numerous messages from audience members enduring parallel ordeals. Plenty had shifted. The lawsuit Ethan and Juliet attempted to file against me unraveled dramatically once Carlos unveiled proof of their scheme to deem me unfit. They didn't just drop the suit, they faced penalties for baseless litigation and had to cover my legal costs, totaling $45,000. Their financial ruin hit fast and hard. Ethan got fired after his company learned of the widespread uproar. Juliet's bid to launch an image advisory firm tanked due to those circulating clips, which trashed her career standing. Now they scrape by in a modest one-bedroom rental on the outskirts, juggling low-wage gigs and battling mounting bills. "We're going live in 5, the producer called out. I gazed at the lenses that would soon relay my account to vast audiences, a blend of anxiety and steadfastness washing over me. Beside me sat Carlos, who'd volunteered to join and clarify the juridical elements. In the crowd were Joseph, Lucy, and Amelia, my steadfast allies through the tough stretch. The deepest wound from those 6 months was Ethan's utter quiet. Post-defeat in court, he hadn't reached out once. No phone calls seeking pardon, no notes unpacking his conduct, no admission of wrongdoing. It seemed he'd opted to resent me rather than confront his misdeeds head-on. Juliet, conversely, had pinged me repeatedly. Her outreach morphed from courtroom intimidations to frantic bids for cash. Her most recent note, arriving merely 2 weeks back, read, "Aurora, we've both erred, but blood ties us. Ethan's crumbling under pressure, and I'm expecting. You can't doom your grandbaby to hardship." Learning of the pregnancy struck like a blade. I'd become a grandma, yet my descendant would mature in a household steeped in bitterness, aimed at me. Still, I'd absorbed life's harshest teaching. You can't rescue those unwilling to change. Such efforts merely fuel their harmful patterns. Mrs. Hughes, 30 seconds to go, Catherine alerted me. I inhaled steadily, recalling the many who'd messaged post videos, recounting their tales of kin-based harm. Elders stripped of financial autonomy by offspring, folks held hostage by wayward grown kids through guilt trips, grandparents warned off from their grandkids unless they forked over funds. Live in 3, 2, 1. The camera's indicator glowed crimson, and Catherine launched into her polished opener. Good evening, and greetings to Stories of a Lifetime. I'm Catherine Diaz, and this evening we're joined by Aurora Hughes, a 68-year-old whose account has rattled the country and thrust elder family mistreatment into the spotlight of public discourse. Mrs. Hughes, Catherine went on. Turning to me 6 months after the drama at your son's wedding, how does it feel realizing your experiences have motivated countless others? Her inquiry was straightforward yet kind, giving me the space to respond in my own way. I'm thankful, I answered, my voice steadying as the words came out. Thankful that the heartbreak of losing my bond with my son has ended up aiding folks facing comparable struggles. For so long, I was isolated and bewildered, doubting if I was the problem. These days, I see that my ordeal is far more widespread than we'd ever want to believe. Catherine acknowledged with a nod and glanced at her script. Share with us the period before that fateful evening, when you first sensed something was off in your connection with your son and his fiancée. This was the prompt I'd anticipated, the chance to describe how emotional and monetary mistreatment creeps in stealthily, bit by bit. It began with minor incidents I recounted, recalling the initial red flags I'd overlooked for the sake of affection, remarks on my years, hints that I couldn't manage independently anymore, gentle pushes toward choices that really serve their interests. Mistreatment within families seldom kicks off with violence or yells. It starts by gradually undermining your sense of worth, by planting seeds of doubt in your perception of things. Carlos shifted closer to offer some juridical insight. What Aurora outlines is a typical sequence in cases of mistreatment toward the elderly. Those responsible, particularly relatives, deploy mind games prior to escalating to overt control. It's sneaky, since it masquerades as caring worry. And the turning point, Catherine probed, when did you choose to reveal the reality of your finances? This was the query I expected, the one demanding I unpack the toughest choice I'd ever made. The strike, I stated plainly, when Juliet struck me right there in the dance hall before 130 guests, after I wouldn't surrender my flat's keys. At that instant, I recognized she'd gone too far to overlook. Suddenly, it wasn't about shielding my relatives from their fallout anymore. It was about safeguarding myself from ongoing harm. The session went on for 45 minutes, delving into every facet of my account. I discussed opting for a modest existence to guard my seclusion, the prolonged hidden aid I'd extended financially, the scheme to brand me unfit, and the court fight that ensued. Every response aimed not just to recount my journey, but to inform viewers on danger signals and support options. Mrs. Hughes, Catherine remarked toward the close of the broadcast, do you have words for your son in case he's tuning in this evening? This hit hardest, the one I'd both feared and yearned for. I gazed straight at the lens, aware Ethan might be viewing. Ethan, if you're hearing me now, I need you to understand that my love for you endures. I'll love you forever as my child, yet love doesn't equate to tolerating mistreatment. Love doesn't require forfeiting your self-respect for their ease. Love doesn't turn you into prey for their avarice. My heart's entrance remains unlocked for you, I went on, sensing moisture gathering in my eyes, but solely if you step through as the principled person I aim to nurture. Only if you meet my gaze and own up completely to what you've done. Only if you demonstrate you've grasped that kinship relies on affection and esteem, not exploitation or deceit. And to everyone viewing who sees echoes of their lives in what I've shared, I extended to the wider crowd. Know this, You deserve respectful treatment, regardless of your years. You deserve autonomy over your funds, your residence, your path. You deserve to draw lines with kin who wrong you. And you deserve to get assistance when those lines are breached. As the lights dimmed, the team burst into cheers. Catherine embraced me, her eyes damp. "Aurora," she said, "that ranks among the most impactful sessions I've conducted. It's bound to transform existence for many." Carlos beamed with approval, recognizing we'd accomplished more than a courtroom triumph. That evening, heading home to my place alongside Joseph, Lucy, and Amelia, a deeper calm settled over me than in ages. I'd shared my narrative, I'd upheld my reality, and I'd channeled my suffering to uplift others. Whatever lay ahead with Ethan, I was certain I'd acted justly. "Aurora," Lucy voiced from behind, "I'm incredibly proud. You've converted your darkest chapter into a safeguard for multitudes." Her sentiment echoed within me as we pulled up. The flat that Juliet what was once merely a cherished possession now genuinely felt like home once more. Not due to any courtroom victory, but because I'd finally come to appreciate my own worth enough to insist on the regard I merited. I'd realized that protecting a bond often means being prepared to let it go. As I got ready for sleep that evening, I understood I'd established the greatest lesson in my existence. It's never too late to defend your own boundaries. You're never too aged to claim your self-respect, and authentic affection can demand the toughest choices. My tale had concluded, yet my journey was restarting. 2 years have elapsed since that pivotal evening that split my existence into distinct eras, before and after. Here I am, penning these words from the very balcony where I once tended my flowers and pondered the quiet indignities I believed I must tolerate for a parent's devotion. How transformed the view becomes once you summon the bravery to assign value to your honor. The day kicked off just like everyone over the past 18 months, with a phone call from Carmen, who oversees the Aurora Hughes Foundation for Senior Protection. Indeed, I chose to title the nonprofit I established using portions of my rerouted legacy after myself. "Aurora, we've got 23 fresh situations this week," Carmen shared, her voice carrying that blend of sorrow and resolve typical among those in our line of work. Each follows the same troubling trends: grown offspring pressuring elderly relatives for assets or funds. Every dossier that lands on my table mirrors echoes of my history. Just yesterday, I examined the records of a 72-year-old lady whose daughter persuaded her to offload her home for her benefit, only for the cash to fund a botched venture and a European getaway. The previous day featured a 69-year-old gentleman coerced by his twins through emotional leverage. "If you won't loan us $50,000, you'll never lay eyes on your grandkids." The twist doesn't escape me. I've transformed my darkest ordeal into my profoundest calling. The organization has aided over 400 older adults in reclaiming authority over their money, their real estate, and above all, their confidence. We provide expert attorneys, counselors, therapists, and a network of assistants that I desperately craved during my own isolation and bewilderment. Joseph remains my closest companion next door, though he's now serving as the foundation's deputy chair. His 72 years brim with fresh vitality ever since he began delivering talks on spotting relational coercion. "Aurora," he remarked to me last week while sifting through files, "I never imagined my retirement would involve sleuthing for troubled kinships, but it's the finest escapade of my life." Lucy settled into the neighboring unit a year back. Following her split from a union that endured just 8 months, she resolved to stay near the boldest individual she admires. Her role as the Foundation's program lead has instilled a mission she lacked in her prior teaching position. "Aunt Aurora," she often confides, "you showed me that true kinships arise not from lineage, but from those who opt to honor you without conditions." The reach of my publicized narrative has yielded surprising outcomes. The volume I co-authored with a reporter specializing in probes turned into a nationwide hit. When Love Wounds, one senior woman stand, has moved over 200,000 units, with every proceeds funneled straight to the foundation. The correspondence from fans serves as vivid proof that my ordeal echoed in countless households where quiet endurance reigned. Carlos continues as my money manager, but he's also taken on the foundation's chief fiscal role. His know-how from navigating the disputes with Ethan proves essential in supporting folks facing parallel plights. "Mrs. Hughes," he noted at our latest review session, "we've reclaimed over $3 million in estates and deposits that exploitative relatives had wrongly seized. The query that arises in every discussion, every probing talk, and each media spot is whether I long for Ethan. The response is intricate and aching. I yearn for the boy he once was, the youth who occasionally revealed compassion and integrity. I grieve the dream of the household I believed existed, but not the recent stretch of deceit, psychological coercion, and ongoing disregard." Ethan reached out precisely 3 times in these 2 years. The initial attempt came 6 months post-broadcast, when colleagues apparently caught the program and shifted their demeanor toward him. The next occurred with the arrival of his child, my grandson Oliver, 14 months ago. The latest was 3 months back after Juliet departed, claiming the infant and half their sparse belongings. On each occasion, his outreach sought monetary aid, devoid of any sincere remorse or recognition of the damage inflicted. His mindset persists unchanged. He views his troubles as unfair treatment from the outside world, rather than outcomes of his own choices. Our final talk barely lasted 5 minutes before he declared, "Mom, you value your pride over your own grandson." I responded with an unexpected sharpness. "Ethan, my self-respect holds equal weight to my grandson, and I wish someday he grasps that truth more fully than you ever have." That marked the initial occasion I ended a call with my son mid-conversation. Strangely, it felt freeing in a profound way. The subject of Oliver, my grandson, remains the sole one capable of bringing tears to my eyes. At 14 months, he has no idea who I am. When Juliet departed, she removed every family picture, even the handful I possessed of him. I've set up a trust fund for his higher education, managed by Carlos, accessible upon his 18th birthday, no matter our connection at that point. Perhaps, as Amelia suggests over our regular weekly meals, Oliver will eventually pursue his own understanding of the family turmoil when he's grown. He might summon the bravery to connect with his grandmother independently. Amelia has evolved into my most trusted ally, particularly after she drew firm lines with her own harmful relatives 10 years back. The most astonishing aspect of these past 2 years is the remarkable boost in my physical and emotional well-being. In the final stretch with Ethan and Juliet, I'd been plagued by ongoing sleeplessness, persistent migraines, and a perpetual anxiety that left me perpetually on edge. My physician notes that recent exams reveal stress markers akin to those of someone a decade my junior. "Aurora, doctor," Hernandez remarked at my latest appointment. "It's remarkable how the body rebounds once we remove harmful stressors. Your blood pressure is ideal. Your rest is rejuvenating. Even your stance has straightened." He's spot on. I carry myself taller now. My tone carries more conviction, and my fingers stay steady during key choices. The floral shop where I was employed shut down a year past, yet I've discovered fresh enthusiasm in the communal garden I co-founded in our complex. I share knowledge on healing herbs and sustainable cultivation with fellow elderly neighbors. This pursuit grounds me in nature and among folks who honor hard-earned insight rather than dismissing it as outdated. My daily schedule now features 3 days weekly at the nonprofit's headquarters, 2 days offering companionship to isolated elders in their residences, and weekends devoted to crafting my follow-up book. It explores actionable methods for spotting and halting financial mistreatment within families, drawn from our real-world interventions. The residence once eyed covetously has transformed into a haven of calm and inspiration. I've repurposed Ethan's former bedroom as a consulting space for those seeking advice. Its walls display gratitude notes, images of mended family bonds we've facilitated constructively, and certificates from academic institutions where I've presented talks. Among the highlights of late has been guiding fellow senior women navigating comparable challenges. Margaret, age 74, approached the organization half a year ago when her son offloaded her vehicle without consent to cover betting losses. We collaborated over 3 months, and just last week she shared a snapshot of herself beaming behind the wheel of a vehicle purchased from her reclaimed funds via legal means. "Aurora," she penned in her note, "you've shown me that drawing lines isn't harshness. It's essential for thriving. You've illustrated that prioritizing oneself isn't self-centered. It's vital. You've proven it's always possible to advocate for your worth." Her message reaffirmed the value amid the suffering. Looking back over these 2 years, I realize my journey lacks the classic resolution of full familial harmony and perpetual bliss. Yet it offers something superior: genuineness, restored honor, and a mission that outlives my individual hardships. I've come to see that the truest act of self-care can involve distancing from those determined to wound you. If I could whisper to the Aurora entering that wedding venue 2 years prior, I'd urge, be brave. The trials ahead will sting deeply, but beyond them lies a existence truer than any dream you held. Serenity is waiting, the kind born from certainty that no one will ever regard you as expendable again. This evening, as I conclude these thoughts, I gaze ahead with fresh optimism. Come morning, I'm scheduled with lawmakers to advocate for enhanced laws safeguarding elders against kin exploitation. In a week's time, I'll launch the organization's 3rd outpost. By next month, a nationwide documentary on the issue begins filming under my lead. At 70, my days brim with deeper fulfillment, significance, and reality than at 68. I've discovered that severing a poisonous tie isn't defeat, it's emancipation. I've come to realize that real family bonds are built through choice, just as much as through bloodlines. And I've shown that it's always possible to start a fresh page in your personal journey, no matter the timing. Whenever folks inquire if I have any second thoughts about that fateful evening, my response remains consistent. Enjoyed my tale. And from which town are you tuning in? Let's connect below in the comments section. If the story resonated with you, consider showing your appreciation with a super thanks. It helps me continue sharing captivating narratives like this one. A huge thanks for your kind backing. I'm eager to hear your thoughts on it. Right now on your display, check out a couple of fresh life accounts that I truly endorse. My channel has even more gems waiting. Be sure to hit subscribe. Catch you soon in the upcoming story, sent with warmth and admiration.